to get rolling.
Right.
I think, again, we have the sort of the breakout discussion questions up top, but I figure we'll just walk through each of them and I can take notes and report out on the discussions, but you know, hopefully everybody had the opportunity to look through the executive summary and dashboard itself. We really just wanted to sort of start off with the discussion of, you know, what stood out, what are the accomplishments, both in the report itself and also more broadly, are there things that we didn't pick up on in the executive summary or in the evaluation where we made progress that we should highlight?
I think getting to that statistically insignificant decline in water quality, like the 0.2 foot, the 0.12 foot decline, I think that's great. The public, I mean, it's hard to understand necessarily Secchi discs if you're an average member of the public, but just talking about how clarity has improved and, you know, the decline has been halted essentially. I think that's an easy one.
Isn't that just in the winter?
Was the overall number 0.12? Was it comparable?
Yeah, it's,
Okay.
you know, and again, with clarity, there's interannual fluctuations. And so that's why we were looking at it sort of over long
Right.
Term. That 1.2, I think, was from
1.2,
97 all the
Right.
way through 2023.
Yeah, so I mean, regardless of what time of year it was, just knowing the changes that have occurred in the area and that whole, I think that's a useful thing to share.
Well, and some of the, you know, reasons why the summer clarity lines, I mean, if we have a warming trend,
Right,
obviously that facilitates the growth of algae.
absolutely.
You know, and I think that needs to be emphasized.
Yeah, yeah,
Because there are things that are beyond our control.
yeah.
I have to admit that, but
Well, but I think, I mean, if you want
there's
to,
another aspect of that, but.
yeah, but I think linking it to that one, right? So saying temperature, like the increase in temperature is this at the lake, and therefore you see this, show that correlation essentially. And maybe connect to what people can do to reverse that trend.
The concept of the lagoon, summer night clarity of change, there was a lot of confusion whether or not the flipping of the lake, well, which finally happened, which is way beyond any control here. But that added some clarity for a while, a lot of people thought that. Actually,
Ken, what is this outlier? I'm on page 184, it's a summary of the thresholds, standard status by threshold category. With the little clouds for air quality and fish, and there's an outlier here, non-attainment air quality.
for air quality.
That's because of fires, right? So up until that time, the trend was very positive, you know, and I think that's a huge accomplishment. And obviously it relates to, you know, as it was mentioned earlier this morning, to cleaner automobiles, to actually a drop in VMT, which I think is something that needs to be emphasized.
I
Because
agree.
there's ongoing, you know, people are insistent that there's more traffic,
Right.
and that's not the case statistically, so.
Yeah.
Yeah, that one particular, the one standard in air quality that's out of attainment is visibility, which again is strongly impacted by.
Right.
And so that is the one, but we do see on the trend side, a number of those, as Dan said, you know, the short-term indicators, the 24-hour, the 1 hour, the 8 hour standards are declining across virtually all of those, indicated, you know, whether it's ozone or visibility or, in the particular, constituents.
Refresh my memory. Noise, is that based on continual noise event or a one-time kind of a singular noise event?
So we have standards that do both.
Okay,
Most of the standards that we report on are the cumulative noise standards.
so continuous.
Yes, so we do have a number of single event noise standards that we just don't have the capability to monitor. So things like motorcycles.
Cigarette boats on the lake.
Exactly. We do, the one of the noise standards that we do actually monitor for single event is our shoreline watercraft noise. And then we do have some data for aircraft, but most of the single event, there's like snowmobiles and all kinds of other standards that we don't currently monitor. So those are all the gray ones in noise.
Okay,
Okay. Where do you monitor that? Is it a stationary thing?
We have, handheld devices that we put in lock boxes. And so for the shoreline ones, they're put on beaches, in certain areas, and we use the same locations year after year. And then the rest of them are, but they're portable monitors.
What about aviation?
I believe there's a monitor that's, on the flight path out of the South Lake Tahoe Airport that we get data from.
On scenic, we need to mention the scenic progress and scenic as well.
Although when you look at the actual scenic reporting, it all looks it looks average when you look at it, so it's interesting. I don't know how you show sort of average threshold requirements, but the overall, like the actual experience of the scenic improvements has improved.
and recreation, I think most people would think we have too much recreation, so we have far exceeded.
Would there be an aspect of, characterize it better than this and saying like,
And what, sorry?
light
Light, yeah,
reduction in?
yeah. That's a good one.
For Sydney.
Yes, because, I hate to say it this way, but if you have old hotels that are run down, problematic, it wasn't that one of our most recent ones, the desire was to have something torn down
Yeah.
sooner
Right.
in order to increase the scenic.
It's
Yeah.
review corridors, are right? The scenic is review corridors, but maybe to James's point, maybe we should, I don't want to create more work for the agency, but maybe we should, a subcategory of that should be urban blight.
Yeah, that's a built environmental and community design.
Yeah,
But
But that's the area, to me, I put that over on his next one, areas of concern, is what we do
Yeah.
with the reduction in blight, because as projects come forward, we condition them such that we are making progress.
yeah,
It's our problem that we don't have people coming forward with projects because of.
I agree, we've
Yeah.
made progress and accomplishments in that field and it's one area.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, maybe it's both.
Because as far as they're concerned, you could measure just on the metrics of how many buildings we have that are either A/condemned
Mhm,
or have not been
right.
habitable. No one's been in them for years.
and I think that, as a result of pressure applied by
Mhm.
Cindy during our conversation about Homewood, that blighted building, the Tahoe Inn, is gonna remain standing for, what, 4 or 5 years before they're obligated to tear it down. So I think we need to be more insistent.
Yes, yeah.
When projects come forward.
Well, and
improve their significant.
That's when we say, how can we continue to build on that success? It's like when, as Cindy said, when these items come before us publicly, we can push the timeline. We need members of the public bring forward these blighted areas more regularly,
Mhm.
especially as part of our decision, so that within a decision, we can actually make that change. Because if it's outside of the decision, we really have very little control.
Do we have an inventory? Of blighted buildings, urban blight?
So not so much. In our scenic evaluation, we do highlight areas where degradation occurs.
But not individual buildings.
Yeah, it's,
I'm Jean McNamara,
Hi,
from
Jean.
TRPA. I kind of manage the scenic contract, the threshold evaluation. And we have different areas around the lake, and we identify urban areas, and urban areas are generally the roadways that are out of pavement, because it does take time to redevelop those, and as they're redeveloped, we do see progress. But because we go out every 4 years, we only do it once every 4 years, we're not maybe capturing that blight as often as we, on a year by year basis, maybe we see it perpetuating. But because it's only once every 4 years, we don't necessarily catch that, or maybe it's like a project that's under construction that we don't and that doesn't necessarily ding the threshold. Because we recognize it's like a temporary situation.
Right, so do you rely on the public to provide you with evidence of blight, for example, in your neighborhood, if there's a building that's been occupied by, vandals or something, it becomes a threat to public health and safety?
that becomes a local issue, in terms of
Falcon
the
Lodge.
TRPA threshold itself. It's just the identified, state highways,
Right.
in terms of like, you know, those are what we look at in terms of the threshold itself, but there is, you know, things like blight, I just know like that, things like that get reported to the city, and the city
So-
goes out and inspects.
In that respect, it'd be beneficial to me though, as if we're looking at an application, to be told by the proponent, or maybe if TRPA could inform us. By the way, this building has been not occupied or has not been in use commercially the last 10, 20, 35, 2 days. That type of information, I think, is beneficial to us for those that don't necessarily drive around the entire lake every day. So, because there are areas where I don't have a clue. You
Right,
know,
right.
Cindy will start mentioning a certain lodge or something, and I'm like, where, what?
Well, the problem is for the Tahoe Inn, I guess local government, I mean, what efforts were made by Placer County to insist that that be turned down? I mean,
Well, really none, because we were in litigation, the project went into immediate litigation, and so then you're waiting for them to come forward with capital plan to
Sure.
build, what are they gonna build?
Right.
And then now you have a condition of approval. So we haven't gone to a place where we, because we don't have a redevelopment agency anymore under California state law.
Yeah.
So how do we force?
Yeah.
And there's a problem trying to force something when if they have no business operating, they have no income.
What about, just this is an aside, unrelated to this, but through the regional housing allocation, could you call it out then? And say, but for this blight, we can meet our need in these areas, and you do a survey of those areas, and then it goes to TRPA.
Well, yeah, they do have, depending on the condition of the building, sometimes, you know, if an older structure that has some salvageable value.
Yeah.
You can actually have contractors come in and they'll take down the building for the salvage value.
Yeah.
I mean, that's one thing. I would suggest that it be used as a exercise for the local fire department, but we are in the basin. I know it's done elsewhere where they actually burn the building down. I mean, and I understand that's probably not gonna happen in the Tahoe Basin. Yeah, we've just been touting this week, so great.
But this is something that we, you know, is either part of an area of concern or building on success, right? When we think about what we want to emphasize, and it could fall under housing, right? What's the threshold on
Incentives for,
Yeah,
you know, for addressing urban blight.
yeah. And, you know, I don't think we necessarily want a hotline for everyone to call in every building they don't
No.
like. You know?
Right.
That's probably true.
It's more of a, like, finding the crux where it fits in, right? And I
Right.
do think arena could be a good one,
Mhm.
because there's requirements for a particular number of units. And if
Right.
we're prevented from meeting those units because of blight, like, there's the answer.
Right. Going back to progress, streams on restoration.
I was just,
Yeah.
that has been incredible.
Because I do want to focus on areas of concern and looking forward,
Yeah.
but I wanted to make sure is there anything else?
Well,
we
that
wanted-
connects to areas of concern, because
Yeah.
what funding are we going to lose for
Yeah.
continued restoration of those streams? So I want to track that.
Well, wildlife, I mean, obviously, you know, I think that bald eagles making a comeback,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's an area of progress.
Maybe some cool imagery of wildlife people have captured over the last 4 years, right? Like interesting birds and stuff like that.
Yeah, you know, those are really good data sets that we have.
We should keep keep emphasizing the invasive species concerns as, you know, as we have made progress, and we can't take our foot off the gas. That's the wrong thing.
That goes on both sides.
Yeah, exactly.
Because simply put, it also gets into scenic,
Right, that's true.
because nobody likes looking.
Algae and, yeah,
Yeah,
deteriorated, yeah,
No,
yeah,
sorry.
yeah. Yeah, that's true. I guess it's invasives in the upland and in the lake. Yeah,
That then triggers the idea that even the stuff that we've done progress and accomplishments and area of concerns is the reason, or proposed legislation to try to make the wake zone rules the same. Cause that gets into noise too, a little bit.
yeah.
So I don't know where this fit in, Ken, maybe you can tell me, you know, under, deep water, threshold, the phytoplankton primary productivity, the down arrow when it's red. But the question is, you know, there's a delicate balance between, you know, our clarity objectives. I mean, you can have a body of water that has good quality water that isn't terribly clear. It may have suspended particles, who knows, but those are filtered out, but the water itself is clear from a health standpoint. But how do you resolve a conflict between wanting to support the food web, right? Phytoplankton is an important part of the food web versus clarity. Now, this is deep water, I know, but I mean, there are some plants in the surface areas too that nourish fish. And we're trying to get the Lahontan cutthroat reestablished at Lake Tahoe. I mean, that's kind of an area, always been an area of concern. How do you balance those objectives? And that's where, you know, we've had these conversations in the past about, is one threshold more important than another? No, they're all equally important. Well, what if they conflict? You know,
Right.
Yeah.
what do you do? You have to make a choice.
Interesting to the pelagic and then the literal productivity, it didn't seem like it was actually studied.
Yeah, I think you know, with primary productivity in particular, and Bob was in here and just left, but, you know, I think there's an open question, you know, I think especially with the TVAL program, and, there was an expectation that, with some of the load reductions, you would see primary productivity improve. I mean, haven't seen that.
Yeah.
So it's an area where we need more scientific inquiry
Yeah.
into. We just don't really understand the dynamics right now. But we know, for example, primary productivity skyrocketed when we had the Caldor fire and all the ash and
Sure.
Yeah.
extra loading into the lake.
Yeah.
And so, that's part of the reason that we're seeing that red down area for primary productivity in deep water was from the Caldor,
Yeah.
impacts.
But even, you know, in the absence of those catastrophic events, I mean, from a geological standpoint, the fate of every mountain lake is to become a mountain meadow.
Yeah,
I mean, that's just part of nature. That's part of the natural process. So, it's kind of like, you know, swimming upstream. We won't see it in our lifetimes, but
Are there other areas of concern that either within the report or even beyond the report that?
well, I thought it was kind of interesting. I guess it's not an issue for staff. I understand that a quarter of the monitoring is done by TRPA, right? Everything else is done by third parties. But some of the recommendations by the people who are the scientists reviewing the threshold report, you know, I don't think they take financial feasibility into account. You know, let's do this. Well, okay, if we have the money.
yeah.
So, I mean, that's an area of concern for me, you know, because unfortunately what you do is you raise the public's expectations that these things are gonna be done, and then we get hammered because they don't get done, because we don't have the staff, and we don't have the funding.
I wonder if we could put a caveat at the beginning of that, just saying, like, you know, the reviewers were not given any requirements or any constraints on the
Right,
recommendations they
Right,
can
I think
make.
that's good,
And so these recommendations just represent their thinking,
right,
and, you know,
but may not be
TRPA,
implementable.
and TRPA has to consider the full economic impacts of
Right.
implementing the
Yeah,
recommendations.
that's-
If you put that up front,
That's
it's,
fine.
it's clear that they were not given those
Yeah, I don't want to
constraints.
insult them,
No,
obviously, they're
exactly,
doing this for
exactly,
free.
exactly.
And I guess maybe a better word is financial viability.
Yeah, but these are sort of in a best case scenario, recommendations came about.
Right. I wanted to, going back to air quality for a minute and looking at controlled burns and needing to have some level of controlled burns. And so how do we adjust our thinking on air quality in light of,
It's like the age old question.
right, that we do need to burn these piles
Yeah.
or some of it, and fire is good in the environment, and that's gonna contradict. So it's like with all of these standards, I go back to what can we really control?
Right.
What can we make progress on, and focusing on those, because I do think it's unrealistic that, you know, we
Yeah.
can address climate change just in the basic.
Yeah.
Sure.
You know?
There was the question when we spoke with our partners at the Tahoe Interagency Executive Committee, that the question of control burns versus wildfire and smoke, and whether you could discriminate between the two. And we did, in our evaluation, you'll see in the detailed analysis, that we did exclude days where wildfires were significant in the basin. And outside of those days where there was a wildfire, there really was no exceedances for those air quality standards. So control burns really weren't contributing to that.
Important.
And I think part of that
And is
is,
that because you average all of the monitoring stations? Because certainly there could be some that are impacted on a given
yes, some
day.
of it does depend on the location of the
Right.
station itself. But I think it was really that in those, I think the quantity of smoke that's coming out of a wildfire versus even a,
Yeah.
10, 15 acre control burn is just so different.
But also you don't allow control burns on your qualities back.
Yeah,
Or during the summer rains, I mean, it's all done during winter
Yeah,
months.
yeah.
And prescribed fire is limited by the local air resources board.
I know, that is a battle I'm in though. As you know, there was one in Carnelian Bay and they, conditions changed, and so now we're trying to find everybody, so I met with their pollution control district and all the fire chiefs, and we're trying to, we've gotta be realistic, how we can't control a change in the
What about being
wind
very,
pattern?
very specific, that like somewhere in the document that the basin is in a fire adapted regime, right? The forests here are adapted to fire, we have excluded fire, and we are in the process of bringing back beneficial fire. And so beneficial fire is very different from no action, which results in mega fires. And, the mega fires are the things that create these terrible pulses.
Yeah,
Beneficial fire, like, don't call it prescribed burns, call it beneficial fire.
yeah.
You're bringing it back to the landscape.
Well, and we talked about,
Yeah, I mean, exactly, and it's all beneficial, it's all coming back to reminding us that we live in fire adapted forests.
well, and even in that situation, the one I'm speaking of, where I was, there was no air quality impact, and I'm just a couple miles from where this fire was, or where the beneficial fire was.
Yeah,
But the fact that we could then talk to people and say, hey, go to this motel, or, we can mitigate getting vulnerable populations out of the situation for that period of time. That's a public policy issue more than a threshold, but there are ways to move people around the basin so that they don't have to experience that smoke during
Right.
those situations.
but I think the narrative in the thresholds can help by
Help.
talking about, monitoring fire adapted forests, just changing the language so that you can more readily then talk about the benefits of prescribed burns.
Right, and as a threshold to me, the agency was set up to handle things that should be, that we can make a difference in, and how do we use beneficial fire to say that we won't have catastrophic wildfire in the basin? We can do that, but those
Right.
outside the basin where the smoke does come in
Right,
and impact us.
get them to advocate for it.
Yeah, yeah,
Give
so
them-
I just wonder about, are we misleading the public and ourselves when we look at air quality standards that take into account fire
Right,
versus vehicles, which is what I think we're trying to make a change in back in the evolution of how thresholds were structured, really, of where we can make a difference.
This is not an area, well, it could be an
Yeah.
area of concern, it's just, looking at the reporting icon legend, and I make a suggestion. Can we just circle with a thin circle, the arrows, because what we're doing is you're using a color, which is dark gray, which also correlates with insufficient data or no target established. And that's very confusing, that would be the report 185.
Yeah, we can make that budget.
Yeah, that would be great, that would be great, because I thought, well, the arrow's going up, but it says insufficient data or no target established based on the color, around the arrow. So if we could just make it independent,
Yeah.
any color, that would be great.
On soil conservation, I'm wondering if we're not making progress because, and this is my pet peeve on another subject, but I feel like we like to regulate things that do mitigate at TRPA sometimes, over-regulate mitigation measures, and so I could be wrong, and in this, but it's a policy question that I think the board needs to look into. Because that is an area of concern that's not improving.
Can you give an example?
Well, if you look at page 193. So land coverage within land capacity 1B. We're still in the red, and same thing with land coverage within land capacity class 2 as well. So it may be a lack of understanding on my part, but I'm just curious the thoughts on that from the staff side.
Yeah, those areas are really where, I think it really highlights what Dan talked about, where you have both the regional plan setting a policy that says we're not going to allow any additional coverage in 1B, no additional coverage in class 3 or 2. And then the EIP coming in and either acquiring, restoring coverage in those areas, but it takes time.
To see the result.
Yeah, and I think that's really what you see within that.
Oh,
5 minutes. We gotta
So,
get.
yeah, I do want to take us
Yeah.
to maybe the looking forward piece, and then we can revisit, but, what are the priorities, over the next, 4 years? And where do you see opportunities for us, to set priorities?
I want us to be very aware of limitations on additional wetlands work, EIP work, based on limitations on funding, how our personnel firings in the basin are affecting us with the Forest Service and others, right? Like, I really want to see us tracking that, how the basin's impacted.
Sure how to articulate this, but my frustration has been the public's concern that we're continuing to deteriorate the lake. I mean, we hear this at every meeting, of course.
That's right.
And how do we better educate and not have the public necessarily look at thresholds we can't do things about, and yet look at the positive things that we are accomplishing through the projects and the reinvestment in the man-made infrastructure. And so how can we better educate the reasoned public and,
Yeah. good point.
How much of the basin is owned by the federal government?
right,
What effect do we have to deal with the private land holdings, which are really
mhm,
the focus of the TRPA?
mhm,
So that percentage of it and what we've been able,
Yes,
the remarkable improvements, if you look at it from the perspective of the minority of land that's private.
that's a really good
Right.
point.
Well,
Show that percentage, that's a great idea.
the other thing would be nice to have, I mean, what's frustrating for me is we're criticized for not doing enough, and we're also criticized for not doing, for doing too little. And there are things that come before the board that we are asked to do that we reject, and we just say, this is not within our wheelhouse.
Yeah.
I think we need a record of what those are, so we can say, look at, we've had numerous people come to us and ask us to extend our authority beyond what we are mandated to do with the compact, and we will not do that. Because we're prescribed by, our authority is limited by the enabling legislation.
Yeah.
But it would be nice to have a list, if you're going to remember, of what we have chosen not to do, what we have chosen to do, that is within our wheelhouse, but maybe is adding an additional burden to staff, and along the lines of what you just brought up. Actually, obviously, we're gonna have to be very circumspect and potentially, and we're gonna have to pick and choose.
Yeah. And I really like this, like, given all the area of the basin, what's the percentage over which we have no regulatory authority, and what's the percentage over which we do, right? So that it's clear where we are making a ton of headway.
Well, we do have some regulatory authority over the Forest
Well, then
Service, what they do,
Yeah,
Well,
non-binding MOU.
yeah,
No, but we do have an agreement.
But they come before us. I mean, you've seen.
Well,
Bike Trail, Lily Lake.
Wherever we had some majority over that.
so you have a non-binding.
And one other
Yeah.
one
Presence.
is VMT. We need to do more housing in the basin, and we'll be reducing VMT dramatically when we do that. out from outside the basin, the trips in and the commutes that we're seeing. It may trigger VMT growth within the basin, right? Because now you have locals who are getting, I mean, we wish they could always take a bus to daycare and to the dry cleaner and to the grocery store, but they don't. And so, you know, trying to address that and educate what is the VMT trigger we're trying to achieve? Because I'd like to see credit when we build housing.
Yeah,
That's
that's the
reducing,
mitigation, yeah,
you know, VMT.
right.
From outside and get credit for that trip from Reno or Carson to the basin for work.
Cause it's all seen as one thing, and I think that's where also there's a understandable perception issue with the community. I don't think we are articulating BMT very well.
It's such a wonky term.
Yeah.
It's hard to.
And it was never expected to be used the way this is being
I know.
used. If you talk to, I've been
I
on
know.
so many
You know
calls
too
trying to,
much.
yeah.
And this report, you know, reports on the new VMT per capita
Right.
standard for the
Right.
first time, which, you know, in the case of the housing example, you have the benefit of reduced VMT for the trip, as well as the denominator increasing with additional resident.
With additional residents to divide it
Per
over.
capita, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, but I'm still concerned, and maybe, you know, you can allay my concerns, that some of these units are being occupied by people who are deciding they want to relocate to Lake Tahoe, and they may not be currently employed at Lake Tahoe. They may not be part of the current workforce, they may not be commuting in, you know, from Carson City or from Washoe County. But they've just decided, well, you know, I could qualify based on my income, and I know we had this conversation on Sugar Pine. You know, my admonition was, can you please put together, go to the employers in the basin and ask them, you know, to ask their employees if they would be interested in pre-lease some of these units, so that we know they're going to people who are currently working in the basin, so it's truly workforce housing. And we're not using this inadvertently as a lure for people to move into the basin who can qualify monetarily for these units. Because that really concerns me, because then we're not gonna get the benefits that we're looking for in terms of VMT reduction.
well, some of that's fair housing law, right? But we can't,
No, I
if they have a voucher and they live in, if they're in Reno, and we've seen that in Truckee. We have not built any affordable housing in Placer County since the Domus project, and that Domus project is all local workers. But now you're right, things have changed, so that's why we have that workforce housing deed restriction. We looked less at income as to where's your employer,
So,
and then you have to be employed.
with very few minutes left,
Yeah,
so
Yeah.
I would like to see if we can throw on there transportation in general. The discussion of not only increasing the ability of people to carpool, micromobility, things of that nature, but also trying to reduce congestion through road improvements, whether it be a loop road or something of that nature, that are to help in various spots, and increasing a little bit of the shoulder to make it safer in certain key areas, so people aren't as in danger.
And to your point, I think we at TRPA put restrictions on transportation projects that are mitigation projects that make it harder to implement. For example, we had nowhere for the East Shore Trail or East Shore Express to pick people up because we put restrictions on SUPs and how long you could have a temporary license, and it created problems this summer, big problems for the Visitors Authority and all of Incline Village. So I do think we need to look at things differently and not make it so painful for our
It
transportation.
was still the school, that's the same.
well, getting
It
to
was
your
not.
point,
We're not allowed to do it.
that's not necessarily VMT, it's congestion, and should there be a threshold on congestion, right? Well, whether it's a threshold, then that should be. Well, absolutely, but yeah, I don't know how to,
That doesn't make sense. Okay,
yeah.
all right, well, something.
So we were supposed to only pick 2 areas of concern,
Well,
right?
well.
And we listed like 7. Did we? Are you not gonna hold us to that?
I think it's too.
Oh, 2 each. Oh, okay, I thought the whole group had to agree with 2.
And we appreciate the feedback, and I think, you know, this is really, the beginning of this process. that-
Two issues, environmental and economics.
That's because we're over achievers. All done?
Thank you, yes.
Fantastic, thank you. And you're reporting out, right? Brian?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Well, I realize that there are laws are an issue. If there is outreach that these, you know, undertaken, employers and.
Absolutely.